basin water transactions, and based upon the learnings from what we have from that project in Columbia River, we now have a big water transaction-based programs in Nevada. We're developing one on the Texas coast. We have efforts that are underway in California, and we're looking at a number of other landscapes where our expertise in water transactions can be applied. In the West around quantity, but increasingly in the East around water quality issues, and how can you apply the same types of business practices, how can you apply the same kind of learnings to affecting, from more of a market perspective, the improvements in water quality that in places where we work, like Chesapeake Bay and Delaware River and Great Lakes. We have 5 regions. This has changed a little bit since Amos and Maggie were involved, but you can see very quickly here a western region, a brand new Rocky Mountain region, our central region, which has a lot of focus in the Great Lakes and northern grasslands, and increasingly looking for interests in that lower Midwest, a northeast and a southern region. Just very quickly, just a quick overview of our Southern Regional Office programs. We have a longleaf stewardship fund, which is that big light green blob across a good part of the southeast. We have a Cumberland Plateau Stewardship Fund. We have that a Gulf Stewardship Fund, which is in blue down there around the Gulf Coast. And then I mentioned that Texas Gulf Coast Water Flow Program. And then that big purplish blob is the Monarch Flyway, one of our newest programs, where the Fish and Wildlife Service came to us and said, we have a big problem with monarchs across their flyway, and we want to invest there. We went out, we matched that Monarch money with private corporate money. And we issued just this year over $3 million in monarch conservation work around a series of strategies that we developed there. I do want to talk a little bit, because I know a lot of people are interested in it, the Gulf Environmental Benefits Fund, which is the fund that we run off of the proceeds from the criminal plea deal associated with the Deepwater Horizon Gulf of Mexico oil spill. Just very quickly, and I'm not going to get into a lot of detail around this, but if you want to talk in more detail, I'm happy to later. The 3 main elements, big pots of money that are coming into Gulf of Mexico restoration as a result of that oil spill. The first one that was settled was the criminal plea several years ago. In that criminal plea, over $2.5 billion was directed to remedy natural resource harm in the Gulf through National Fish and Wildlife Foundation investments. So we were on the receiving end of $2.5 billion to be allocated over a long period of time into the Gulf, according to specific conditions set forth in that plea agreement. More recently, the Restore Act, which is the Clean Water Act penalties, and the natural resource damage penalties, which were created under the Oil Pollution Act. Several of us were talking earlier about what we learned, going all the way back to Exxon Valdez. Well, the Oil Pollution Act came out of that event, and the natural resource damage process came out of that event. But most recently has been in the news, the consent decree agreement between the government and BP to settle those 2 Clean Water Act and Oil Pollution Act set to penalties. So when all is said and done, there's going to be somewhere in the neighborhood of $20 billion spent in Gulf of Mexico restoration over the next decade or more. Really a once in a multi-generation opportunity to have impact there. People ask me, by the way, whether we're going to do a good job at that or not, and I would say first, certainly NFWF will. But even dating back to my time at NOAA, when we were beginning early action projects under that natural resource damage column, and now that is continuing. One of the things that I said that was going to be most important to the entire effort going forward is that all of the agencies, all of the organizations that are involved in trying to restore the Gulf, particularly using these funds, really work together to have a common understanding of the science behind the decisions that have to be made throughout the Gulf region. So whether it's coastal and marsh restoration, or whether they're blue water projects miles offshore. The best way to ensure, one of the best ways to set a foundation to ensure coordinated and effective use of those dollars is to have a really strong and shared understanding of the science from which we can build mutual strategies. That's something that we think a lot about at NFWF, but we think is going to be also really important in the Gulf region going forward. Our money, people ask us a lot about that, and it's again a great opportunity. It's very directed. So under the criminal plea, half of that money goes to Louisiana, and it can only be spent on projects that are contained within the long-range Louisiana Coastal Master Plan. And again, I'm sure that the general has a lot more potentially to say about that. Others do as well. But they're looking at and already initiating big barrier island restoration work. They're looking at big diversions of sediment-laden waters out of the Mississippi into those lower coastal marshes down there. And then we're also involved with each of the other states in developing project portfolios, and of course with the percentages that you see listed there. One of the things that I think a lot of people, particularly if we're sitting here, are concerned about is, look, a lot of the problems in the Gulf of Mexico originate way upstream and way inland. These monies are pretty specifically restricted to work that is occurring within those 5 Gulf states, and even more closely within the coastal areas of those states. But we are working really hard with our money to also assure that alignment with the Restore Council and with the natural resource damage assessment authorities in the state and the federal agencies to maximize impact, to leverage our resources, and to assure coordinated effect, and also to measure outcomes. So when you see some of the overarching goals and focus areas, not only within our Gulf Environmental Benefits Fund, but also in those other efforts as well. You see big focus on barrier island restoration. You see focus on obviously the health of coastal bays and estuaries and marshes, and then a number of the species that you see listed here. I think one of the things that was really interesting about this Gulf event was so many of the damages occurred in in deep ocean environments, blue water environments. They were really hard to quantify. Had we moved beyond, and this is probably just taking off my NFWF hat and speaking a little out of school from a government perspective, but had we moved into kind of long-term court cases around those damages, we would have had dueling scientists at work for probably decades to come. So from my perspective, this consent decree settlement is a really good deal for the government and for the people and the resources of the Gulf region. Just a quick look at some of our current projects. And I'm not going to go into a lot of detail in any of those, just in the interest of time and saving a few minutes for questions, because I just did want to say one more thing, which is, as you saw in that map of the southern region that I put up earlier, there was a blue set of sort of area depicted around the coast. So we have developed this companion Gulf Coast Conservation Grant Program that is seeking to fill some of those gaps that are not being addressed by the Restore, the Natural Resource Damage Assessment, or our Gulf Environmental Benefits Fund. This is something that is in its early stages, but that we're hoping can grow not only in size, but also in geographic scope as we begin to look at some of these challenges, again, that come from much further inland and up river systems.